Now let's talk about creating the pipelines. When working on a Kedro data science project, you usually have to set up two types of pipelines. Pipelines for data processing and pipelines for data science. Let's start looking at how we would set up a data processing pipeline. We previously registered the company and Charles datasets to our data catalog. We can use these two datasets as an input to our data processing pipeline. Each pipeline is composed out of a series of smaller units called nodes. Each individual node has a matching node function, which runs the code for that specific step in the pipeline. To create our nodes, let's have a look into the pipelines directory. Let's create a folder called data processing. And within this folder, we create a nodes.py file. Within the nodes.py file, we'll have two functions, preprocess companies and preprocess shuttles. Each of the two input datasets will be fed into one of the two functions. We can simply copy and paste the code from the documentation into our Python file. Now that we have our individual nodes function, let's wrap each one of them within a node. This will enable us to create pipelines from the nodes we created so far. Within the same data processing folder, we create the pipeline.py file. And we include the create pipeline function. As you can see, this pipeline contains two nodes, and each one of the individual nodes runs one of the preprocessing pipelines we defined previously. The inputs to each one of the functions actually point to the datasets we've registered within our data catalog, so companies and shuttles. The outputs of these node functions can be used as input for other node functions down the pipeline. So need to add these two imports so that we have the pipeline object class and the node function available. At the same time, we need to import our preprocessing functions from the nodes.py file. Last but not least, we create a init file within our data processing folder. And within this file, we just import our pipeline. If you're familiar with Python, you might know that the effects of having the init.py file within a folder means that this particular folder becomes a Python package. Now that we've created our pipeline, the next step is registering it to the project. We do this by going to the pipeline registry and registering our pipeline. We first import our pipeline. Within the register pipeline functions, we instantiate our pipeline and we return it as a dictionary. You might have noticed that we have two keys within this dictionary, one called default and one called DP. This is useful because sometimes we might want to run this pipeline by its name, data processing, and we might also have multiple pipelines within our project. At the same time, using this default key means that whenever we run a Kedro pipeline without specifying which one we're interested in, this pipeline will be running by default. Now let's test our code. We first do so by testing one of the nodes. This command will test the preprocessed companies node. As you can see, the run was successful. To test the entire data processing pipeline, we just do Kedro run. Pipeline execution completed successfully. You might have noticed that this pipeline ran pretty fast. In a real-world scenario, usually preprocessing takes a lot of time, so obviously you might want to cache your data at some point. Let's have a look into how we would do that. In order to understand how to persist preprocessed data, we have to understand how the data catalog works in Kedro. Whenever we run a pipeline, Kedro looks into the data catalog to see whether some of the inputs or some of the outputs are present. If, say, the output of a node is not present in the data catalog, then that particular dataset is stored in what is called the memory dataset. This will persist the data between different nodes of the pipeline, while the pipeline is still running. However, once the pipeline has finished, the memory will be cleared. In order to persist preprocessed data, we need to add it to the data catalog. We do this by going to our base catalog and adding two new datasets. If we compare our new datasets with the ones that we registered initially, you can see that the type for both is pandas CSV dataset. You might have noticed that Shadows initially was an Excel dataset, but the preprocessed version is a CSV dataset. That can be useful if you want to ensure a certain level of consistency between the datasets we're working with in our project. It's also useful to know that we're not limited to the original data types that we used for our datasets. As we mentioned before, in Kedro, you can use various types of datasets. You're not limited to only locally stored files, but you can also use files that are stored in S3 or data that is stored in a database. Whenever we run our pipeline, Kedro will take care of saving these preprocessed datasets that we've defined within our data catalog. We don't need to make any changes to our code in order to do this. Before we run our data processing pipeline for one last time, let's look into how we would join all of these three datasets together into one single dataset that we can use into our data science pipeline later down the road. In order to do this, we'd need to go back to our nodes file where we defined our preprocessing functions, and we should add a new function for joining all of these datasets. We call our function createModelInputTable. Within it, we receive the shuttles data frame, the companies data frame, and the reviews data frame. We merge these three data frames with pandas. We drop missing values, and finally we return our model input table. Once we created this new node function, we have to add it to our existing pipeline. We have to go to pipeline.py and we have to create a new node. We also have to import this function, and this is how our updated pipeline should look like. One last thing we might want to do is to also persist our model input table. In order to do this, we have to add this dataset to our data catalog. We once again save it as a CSV, and we store it within the primary folder from our data engineering framework. Let's run the Kedro data processing pipeline for one last time before we move on to the data science section. Completed 3 out of 3 tasks. So this is how you create a data processing pipeline using Kedro. If you want to stay in touch and receive notification whenever I release new videos related to data science, machine learning, AI, please click that subscribe button and also hit the notification bell if you want to get notifications as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching this video and see you soon.